Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to MedHeads. Today we have Oscar Grano and Craig Payne with us. And we're going to be talking about self-esteem, ego, balance, and how they relate to addiction and recovery. So Craig, what's your view of the importance of self-esteem and ego in this process?
I just think it's something that comes up along the way. And the way we look at self-esteem and the way we look at ego can be challenged a little bit.
Why should it be challenged?
Well, it needs to be, because there's the thoughts that along the way that I know what I'm doing is a common thought amongst people, and I know what's best for me, and I know what works for me, and that needs to be challenged. And also the thought that maybe they're not as bad as other people, and that their stories are worse, and so what works for someone else isn't going to work for them. And so just need to be challenged on that, to accept that, oh no, we're all in this together. We've all got similar problems going on, different stories, but similar problems. And there's underlying issues that need to be worked on, and that needs to be addressed.
And Oscar, does that hold true for you?
Yeah, 100%. And I also believe as well that I've seen a lot that for a lot of people in addiction, that they have an overinflated ego to compensate for how small they feel inside and to compensate for their low self-esteem. And that, a kind of process of learning that, you know, what you need to do to build a genuine self-esteem can actually be quite simple.
What do you have to do to build a genuine sense of self-esteem?
Well, I believe you just need to do esteemable things to begin with.
Yeah.
I think it's about where your action is.
Can you give us some examples of esteemable actions?
Yeah, of course. Well, it could even just be, you know, in the beginning, in the early days, it could be as simple as showing up to catching up for someone with coffee on time, you know, not making people wait. You know, when you get your first job in recovery, you know, like actually not robbing the place, you know, things like that for a lot of people, they've never been able to do in addiction. And I also believe that it's, you know, I know for me, it's very simple. If my behaviors line up with my values, then I'm okay with myself.
So, Oscar, if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that people in addiction actually feel very vulnerable and very threatened, and they've got very low self-esteem. But they may present a facade that is very arrogant. Is that right? Or they may pretend to be
definitely
even aggressive.
For some people,
so arrogance and aggression are almost the facade, and underneath that facade, there's the frightened little child. Craig, does that ring true with you and your experience and in your professional dealings with patients?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what Oscar's talking about there, the overcompensation from people, it really rings true, you know. And sometimes, you know, there's the old it's about challenging the story that you've told yourself and that you believe yourself. You know, people try to cover up deficiencies in behaviors and things by overcompensating, and as we progress further through, we realize that they're the things that need to be worked on. They're the things that need to be addressed. Otherwise, you're going to stay trapped in the addiction.
And there's also this sense of uniqueness, isn't there? I'm different. As part of the ego strength, I am unique in my own suffering. I'm therefore worthy of special attention, or I'm worthy of not actually having to engage in groups, or I don't really have that problem. And also there's the uniqueness in terms of, well, actually I'm the best expert for my care. So Oscar, do you want to tease that out a little bit? The uniqueness of the suffering and the uniqueness of the treatment plan. Can you tell us what your views are on that?
I remember when I first got into recovery, there was something I heard somebody talked about believing that they were terminally unique.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, when they started going to support groups and started looking at getting into recovery, it was very much of a perspective of, oh, well, that's all well and good, and it'll work for you, but you don't understand what it's like for me.
Yeah.
And I remember getting told in the beginning how important it was to listen for the similarities and not the differences.
Yes. And how do you communicate that to someone who's feeling frightened, on the verge of making a first step to recovery and maybe thinking of going to their first group? That's part of the defense mechanism, is this, as you've said, this terminal uniqueness. How do you help someone in that situation? What can you do to get them across the threshold, as it were?
I think you can just show them unconditional kindness, and
Yes.
hope that hope that other people in the group show them unconditional kindness, and that unconditional kindness is enough for them to hang around long enough to start to get that message that maybe they do belong there, maybe this is somewhere that they can get help, and maybe there are things that they can relate to, and that
Yes.
they want to come back, so their thinking has an opportunity to be challenged.
So that's a concept that I haven't heard before, this idea that within a peer support group, one of the powers of that group is the unconditional kindness. Do you think that's common in peer support groups, or is this something that you and your professionalism have developed?
I think it's common in peer support groups.
Yeah.
I don't think that really
Is
work.
it labeled as such? Is it given that kind of name?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of people that I've known over the years have all had the ones who've managed to have long-term recovery, have definitely had that experience within the peer support groups. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about you, Craig? I mean, what would you comment on in terms of this terminal uniqueness and this unconditional kindness?
Yeah, I think there's this feeling of always being better than or less than, and
Yeah.
so it's constantly comparing yourself to other people.
Yeah.
And it's quite often when people do rock up to support groups, when people do rock up to things, they think that they don't need it, that they should be able to do it on their own, and this is the
Yeah.
ego, and they look around the room and they look at all these other people and judge them by clothing, judge them by their stories, judge them by all these various aspects, whatever they want to do to help make themselves feel better. And it's only through going a little bit more and being encouraged and, as they say, listening for the similarities and not the differences. And the more that you can get people to understand the similarities in the story, the more that point of difference is broken down, and the more that they start to see and feel comfortable within the group and start to see that actually they do fit in and that their story is maybe not so unique.
So I'm hearing three key words here. I'm hearing uniqueness, kindness, and similarities. Yeah, that to me is beginning, that could be the mantra for today's discussion. Craig, how do you demonstrate unconditional kindness? What does that mean in reality? So just picture the scene. This is my first ever group. I'm an angry man. I've been traumatized. I've got a significant dependency on methamphetamine. I've got a criminal record. I've got hepatitis C. I'm angry. How do you help me?
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, is like everyone's got these different stories, and so what the story is doesn't matter, but how they present to the group is where it starts, I think. And it starts with acceptance. It starts with knowing that we all come in that point of fear. It starts with knowing that everyone comes in not really knowing what to expect, and some people just want that instant fix. So,
Oscar, how do you help me? What do you say to me on my first 5 minutes of being in this group? What do you say to me, Oscar?
I say welcome. I say welcome. I say, you're in the right place. And, at the end of the meeting, I say, keep coming back.
That's great to hear.
So
welcome, you're in the right place, and then keep coming back. Oh, how do you respond then to the people who say, no, it was useless. I didn't get anything out of that. The first time, no, I just didn't want to do it again. You know, how do you respond? What does that entail or demonstrate? Craig, you're smiling. In fact, both of you are smiling, but Craig first. I didn't get anything out of that group. It was useless. How do you respond to me then? I remember I'm still this angry man with methamphetamine use disorder and hepatitis C from injecting. And
start a conversation. Ask them what
do
they
you
were
say to
looking
me?
for. Just, start the conversation. Ask what you were looking for. Encourage you to keep coming back. Tell you that you're not going to get something out, maybe not going to get something out of every group, that the headspace that you come in can affect that. But just to keep coming back and giving it a try and start a conversation and see, and eventually you can find that they did connect with something. And there was a point there that can take
that to me is a very important point. If you keep going to groups long enough, eventually you will hear what you need to hear. You may not hear it on the first, the second, the third, the fourth, or fifth time, but eventually you will hear what you need to hear. Something will be said that finally clicks in you, that unlocks your potential for recovery. That's what I say to my clients, because for me, it's quite rare to have a client that says, you know what, that first group that you advised me to go to, it was fabulous. I won't go anywhere else. I'll just keep going to that group. That actually is quite rare, isn't it?
Yeah, the attitude that you go with definitely brings a lot to it. And the more familiar you start to feel with the expectations, with how things run, with the group, which isn't just within yourself, and you start to feel a little bit more open to talking some more, and your ears start to open a bit more, and you start to hear the messages coming through to you.
So to go back to the point of esteem, self-esteem is a very rare commodity, but it's a very needed commodity. And in my view, unless there is self-esteem, you cannot open up to be receptive. Your ears can't open unless you've got enough self-esteem to actually open up your ears. Because if you've got low self-esteem and you're feeling defensive, you're hunched, you're not open, you won't listen. Does that ring true with you guys then? Is it the case that a lack of self-esteem actually impedes or keeps people trapped in addiction and then impedes recovery? Oscar, what would you say to that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I believe that, if you're trapped in addiction, that, there's some reason that you're there, and there's some reason that you started to use. And more often than not, that reason is that there is some reason that you are unable to be present in your life. It's because you need to change the way that you feel, or thoughts that are going through your mind, or, what your reality is whilst you're present. That needs to change for you because you can't bear it. So it really is the thing. I know for me, when I first started going to support groups, that unconditional kindness that I experienced, I'd never experienced anywhere else before. And it made me kind of do a double take and go, hang on a minute, who are these people and why are they being so kind to me? They don't even know me. And it was because of that experience. There's a saying that they say, in groups like that, you can be loved back to life, and it's like these people and this environment was so unconditionally loving and kind that I had the desire to keep coming back. And within that process, I was able to start showing myself that love and kindness.
Well, what would you say to that, Craig?
Yeah, and I think, look, if self-esteem's low, you can get caught in the trap of feeling like you don't need the help, you don't deserve the help. And so you're not opening up to being willing to accept the help either. And it's so much in the better you start to feel about yourself, the more you'll accept help and the more you'll take on board. And the better you start to feel, the less you start to feel like the substances to assist you. It's a really double-edged sword. Between feeling worthy of wanting, like, you want the help, you're in the desperation, but it's that thing of judging yourself and judging other people, and that pushes the self-esteem further down. But once you start to live within in alignment, you start to hear the stories, and this is what it's about. All these groups, they only want the best for you. It's not for them, it's not for anything else. They just want the best for you. And so as you start to live your values, as you start to live within your alignment, and you start to have a better day in general, that's where things are going to turn around, and you just feel better about yourself.
So the key thing about self-esteem is that you need it to actually engage in recovery. But what if you don't have any self-esteem? I mean, Oscar alluded to this idea that self-esteem is, or the lack of self-esteem is closely interwoven with a past history of trauma, etc. It can be very difficult to actually get enough self-esteem to make that first step, can it not? Oscar, well, how would you deal with that? Or how would you advise someone who's so traumatized and so low and feel so unworthy of love or help or kindness? What do you say to people like that?
The same thing as I said before, if somebody's not open to an idea, you can't force them to open up to it. Or all you can do is show them that unconditional kindness and just hope that that is enough for them to open up enough just to begin at least with the acceptance of their situation and where they're at and what's causing it. And, I've known people who've been in recovery for really long periods of time and still talk about how they struggle with their self-esteem and how, it can be a really long ongoing process. And I believe that it is possible to get recovery from addiction before you have a really strong sense of self-esteem. I think that it's something that comes a lot slower for some people than others.
Yeah. What would you say to that, Craig?
Yeah, I think it's in how you measure it, or how you measure yourself. And the more you can start to feel equal to other people, then that's part of that. That's a part of the process. But yeah. The more you change your behaviours, the more you'll just start to get to the other side. Yeah, self-esteem builds. Oh, sorry, and that's right. And so this is why we need to look at things throughout the day that are helping you feel better. And this is why we look at the whole life, the holistic point of view, because we're looking at little things throughout the day that might start with making your bed in the morning. Or the fact that you're even starting treatment, the fact that you're even starting to look at things. And this is why we need the network around us. And if that's the counsellors or the friends and family, but just the support networks to help encourage and just to be pointing out the positives and the things that you are doing, because you can tend to get pretty negative focused. And so we just need people to point out the things that we're doing well as along the way to help boost the self-esteem.
So we're talking about the celebration of minor victories here, aren't we? Make
Absolutely.
your bed in the morning and then go to bed, put the head on the pillow at night without having used. That's a victory. That's a huge victory, isn't it? Now let's talk about before the point of recovery. To what extent does self-esteem and ego allow and permit drug use? To what extent does self-esteem and ego allow this idea that I don't really have a problem, I'm in control of this, I can do this? What do you think, Oscar? How does self-esteem perpetuate drug use before the point of recovery?
Well, I know for me, before being in recovery, before finding drugs, my self-esteem was so low and I felt so uncomfortable within my own identity that drugs were the perfect opportunity and the perfect thing for me to build an identity and to build, build a self-esteem in a way that was obviously fabricated and not in reality and not who I really was. But at the time, it felt like it was what I needed to feel okay in the world and within myself. And then I suppose I just kind of ran with it from there.
So the drugs gave you self-esteem. Was there ever a point when you were using drugs where you felt that you were in control and that your self-esteem allowed you to think to yourself, I've got this, I can do this, I can control this? Did that ever happen to you?
Yeah, but the periods of time where I was able to convince myself of that became shorter and shorter. And yeah, it really was that process of each time that I'd go to try and stop. And then when I'd come back home, that the goal would always be, well, yeah, I'm going to try and start. I'm only going to use it these times with these people in this way. And surely I'll end up somewhere different. And there was those few times where going into it, I solemnly believed that I'd be capable of doing that. Yeah.
But it wasn't the case, was it?
No.
Craig, what about you? Do you think that
Yeah, no, I
self-esteem...
think,
Sorry, go on.
yeah, no, well, that's the thing. I think low self-esteem can be such a leader into drug use in the first place. And and with drinking and things, it's like, oh, it just boosts my confidence and I feel so much better, and so it's used for the low self-esteem, but the ego keeps you trapped in it when you start to think that you can do it alone, and you start to think, oh, I should be able to control this, I should be able to stop, I should be able to only do this on weekends, and because I'm in control of everything else in my life, so why can't I should be able to control this? But as you start to realize that you can't, the self-esteem then gets lower. So ego is telling that you can control it, but all the while your self-esteem's getting eaten away because you can't. And so it's this really difficult balance.
So there's a self-delusion there, isn't there?
Absolutely.
You're lying to yourself. You're not being honest with yourself.
Yeah. So the ego keeps you trapped, but the low self-esteem keeps you trapped at the same time.
Yeah. Now, that's the descent into drug use and drug addiction. I mean, that kind of balance, is there a balance in recovery? But I mean, you've identified these two drivers about low ego and low self-esteem, or changes in ego and changes in self-esteem. Craig, does the reverse happen in recovery?
I think in recovery, and for people that start to get long-term recovery, they're constantly, there's a real self-awareness that goes with it. And they're constantly reviewing where they're sitting within their ego and with their self-esteem. And this is why we need people around us to keep us accountable and to call us into account, and think that, if we're getting a little bit too overconfident, because, as we know, overconfidence leads to complacency. We start to think we've got this and then stop doing all the things that have been working for us along the way. And just as much, we need people around us to make sure the self-esteem's not lowering too far, so that we don't fall into that danger zone either, of looking for external support. So, or something external to self to make you feel better. So really need people around, and I think that's where, and learning to modify those behaviors, learning that you need to modify your thoughts and behaviors along the way, and bounce ideas off people. And so again, the bigger and better the support network that you've got, the more people can help you keep your ego and self-esteem in check.
So self-esteem and ego, they can impede the feedback that you need from your support network to grow as an individual. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like I need my beliefs challenged. I need the story that I tell myself challenged, because my head will tell me one thing and take me somewhere. But I need people to challenge that, because history will tell me where those thoughts will take me.
What do you think, Oscar?
Oh, absolutely. It's like, I have to learn how to give myself permission to feel good about myself and to feel confident and strong within my attributes. But at the same time, there always has to be a level of humility within that as well. And I think that a big part of being in recovery is discovering that balance.
I need people around to make sure that I was just going to say, I need people around to make sure that I'm still taking risks, but not too big, like I'm still living life, and taking chances, but more importantly, that I'm still making mistakes. because if I'm not making mistakes, I'm not trying new things, and I'm never building my self-esteem, and I'm never building things up from there.
You've used the word humility, Oscar. Some people may feel threatened by humility because they may interpret it as false humility. Have you ever come across that? Or is there such a thing?
A little bit.
Um,
Example of false humility.
Okay, so I'm looking at this situation from the perspective of someone who's in early recovery, who's very defensive, who feels that they're different, this terminal uniqueness, and they're confronted by someone who maybe is in a position of power or authority over them, or at least perceived authority, and then that person demonstrates some kind of, or gives a statement that says, "Oh, look, I'm as bad as you, or I'm as not bad as you." That would be the wrong word. I suffer as much as you, and this patient is seeing how successful they are compared to them. Could that come over as false? What I'm trying to get at is that there has to be an underlying veracity, a sincerity in the message that is communicated within humility. And I know some clients who feel that, certainly in certain peer groups, that they just feel surrounded by people who are not sincere. But maybe that's a function of that individual's terminal uniqueness, as you've said. What do you think about that? It could be.
Well, I think try some different groups out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different groups, and there's always going to be somebody that says something that ticks you off the wrong way.
Yeah.
And sure, there's people who have long-term recovery, but they're still a very long way away from reality, and it can take people a really long time to be able to detach from their ego and to be able to get that balance of what is genuine self-esteem, what is feeling good about myself genuinely, and what is, overinflation of my ego to still compensate for the fact that I don't feel good about myself.
Yeah. So that balance between ego and arrogance, or humility and arrogance, really, that's really important then to go on as one progresses, both not only in recovery but also in general life. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, I think absolutely, and it can be reflected in the behaviours. Am I constantly doing things to make myself feel good, or am I doing things to help other people feel good too? If you're only concentrating on yourself all the time, then maybe you're overcompensating for the low self-esteem, so you're not actually accepting the true story of what's going on.
Yeah. Gentlemen, as usual, we've run out of time far too quickly. Thank you both for your great wisdom. I need one concluding message, one final hope, one thought that we can carry away from this. Craig first.
Don't be afraid of making mistakes, and have good people around you.
And
keep
Oscar?
you in check.
I'd just say stick with the strength.
Yeah.
Stick with the strength, and when you're seeking help, after a little while, you'll be able to see whether whether they're walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you. That's it for today's MedHeads. My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong. I look forward to seeing you all next time.